So maximizing productivity of a sow. What do I want to do today? My talk will be divided in two parts. The first part will deal with mammary development. So short introduction, a very brief summary of the factors that can stimulate mammary development, some nutritional, some hormonal factors. And if you're more interested in the effect of body condition on mammary development, in the breakout session, I will cover that more specifically, 2 projects that were done, so please come to that if you're interested. Then, when I was here 5 years ago, I talked about the Teat use project, the importance of Teat use in parity 1 for the milk produced from that teat in the next parity. Some of you may have been here. Can you raise your hands, people who listened to me 5 years ago? Okay, so it's not too bad. I will not recover to, anyway, stuff that people already know. But I will just very fast talk about that to follow up with the next project that deals with the duration of suckling in parity 1 and its effect on parity 2. So anyway, it's a continuation. Then I will move... Oh, no, black is no good. I'm a right and left person, so right is black now. That's no good. Anyway. Second part of the talk, Colostrogenesis. Colostrum. What is the importance of colostrum? What are the factors that can affect the yield of colostrum, the composition of colostrum? What makes it transfer from colostrum to milk? And then I will end by talking about a recent project I've done where I tried to prolong the colostral phase, and obviously concluding remarks. First thing I want to tell you, the sow is not producing enough milk to sustain optimal growth of her piglets. If you take a baby pig and up top of the milk it's receiving from its mother, you also give milk from a bottle, it will grow more. Piglets have the capacity to grow more, but they would need more milk. If you look at litter size, genetic companies have done a wonderful job. They've increased litter size. Hats off, wonderful. Now I got to work. Because now I have to make sure that all these little piglets are getting enough milk, which is a major problem. You increase litter size, you decrease the amount of milk that each of these piglets is drinking. So hyperprolificity is, in fact, a new problem. How can we increase sow milk yield? One factor that is limiting or that is very important for the amount of milk produced is the number of cells that can synthesize milk. So the maximum number of cells that can synthesize milk that you have at the beginning of lactation, obviously, the greater milking potential. So yes, mammary development is important, and it is related to potential milk yield. What I want you to look at here, we have a side cut from a mammary gland. You have 2 ductules at the end in the teat. So when you milk a sow, you see 2 streaks of milk. That's very normal. The animal is not sick. That's the way it should be. Then these little ducts ramify, and at the end of each, you have alveoli. And it's in these the cells around the alveoli, the epithelial cells, that will synthesize the milk. 2 words I want you to remember. You see them in red. Parenchyma, extraparenchyma, because these will come later on. Parenchyma is the good tissue, the tissue that synthesizes milk. Extraparenchyma is the fat layer around the mammary gland that does not synthesize milk. When do we see mammary development taking place in pigs? 3 times. From 3 months of age to puberty, the last third of gestation, and in lactation. It is during those 3 periods that you can try to stimulate mammary development. Why? I always say 3 times 0 gives 0. If I have no mammary development, don't try to give me any type of feed or any type of hormone. I'm still going to have no mammary development. But if you have a gilt that is having some mammary development, then it's time to try to increase it even more. The 2 first periods are the one that I'm most interested in, before puberty, end of gestation. Why? Because I want the sow to have the maximum number of mammary cells at the beginning of lactation. What hormones are important for mammary development? There's 2 major ones, prolactin and estrogens. At puberty, what happens? You start to have estrogens that come into the circulation. What happens in terms of mammary tissue? Increase the amount of parenchymal tissue, the good tissue that synthesizes milk. You also see the appearance of mammary ducts. which is very good, that will be leading to milk synthesis. So yes, estrogens are essential at puberty. You also see estrogens at the end of gestation. Why? Because they come from the fetal-placental unit. So in the end of gestation, on day 110, there's a positive correlation between the estrogen concentrations in the blood of the sow and her mammary cell number. So estrogens are important for mammary development at puberty and also at the end of gestation. Prolactin. In a growing gilt, if you inject porcine prolactin for 21 days, starting at 75 kilogram body weight, what happens? You see no change in extraparenchymal tissue. I don't care about that tissue. Parenchyma, look at this. Doubling of the amount of parenchyma, irrespective of the dose. So 4 milligrams is good enough. And look, fat, protein, yes, there's a change. And DNA gives you an idea of the number of cells that are present. Great increase in number of cells. So if I give prolactin to my growing gilt, it will stimulate her development. Somebody here may ask me, yes, but will she produce more milk? And I will tell you, ask me in 2 years. I'm doing it now because we had to kill all the animals. So it'll come. Now in gestation, is prolactin important? What you see here on the left-hand side is a mammary gland from a sow that had her prolactin inhibited from day 70 to 110 of gestation. And actually, the same thing is present if you do it only from day 90 to 110 of gestation. So, right-hand side, you have a nice mammary. We'll move to this side. Nice mammary section with the pink parenchymal tissue in the middle, the extra parenchyma around. You move to this animal with no prolactin, and it's horrible. Lots more extra parenchymal tissue, and the parenchyma here is full of fat. So very, very inhibited mammary development. I get rid of prolactin, inhibits mammary development. Okay, how about giving it back? Major problem now is that there is no commercial prolactin available. So we have to kind of work at it through other ways. And recently, a project was done using a pharmacological agent called domperidone. Domperidone is used in humans for Parkinson's disease. So it's nothing that's bad for humans. And that will increase the synthesis of prolactin by the animal. I'm not giving her the hormone. I'm getting her to synthesize more of her own hormone. What happened? Increased alveolar, and this was done in that late period of gestation, days 90 to 110, where you do have very important mammary development. You increase the prolactin in the blood of the sow at that time. It increases alveolar volume of these mammary glands, increases milk yield by 25% in the subsequent lactation, increases weights of the piglets, and no change in composition. So yes, prolactin is important to increase milk yield and mammary development. Let's move to nutrition. Again, we see the 3 periods where we have rapid mammary development, and I can already tell you, nutrition in all of these periods can have an impact on mammary development. I will just show you what has a positive impact. Feed restriction is not a good thing. So if you restrict feed intake in prepuberty from day 90 of age until puberty by either 25%, 20%, 30%, bad news. You want to feed your gilts, your growing gilts, ad libitum, starting at day 90. Before day 90, I don't care as a lactation biologist. Because if you restrict feed intake before day 90, when you have no mammary development, it has no effect. It does not inhibit mammary development at puberty because it's in the period with 0 mammary development. But don't do it as of 90 days of age because, again, you do have mammary development, feed restriction brings it down. Obviously, you're going to tell me I don't restrict my gilts, which is fine. However, nowadays we have more and more problems of sows that have, feet and leg problems, lameness, and a lot of it is related with animals that are growing too fast. So this is something I'm working with Leon on right now and trying to see if we can decrease the growth rate and see if we can do that without having a negative impact on mammary development. What do we know about puberty, feeding in prepuberty also, that could stimulate mammary development? I talked about estrogens being important. Feeding a phytoestrogen, so a plant source of estrogen, in that critical period from 3 months of age up to puberty, 183 days of age. So I had animals that were either eating a standard soya diet or that diet plus 2.3 grams per day of gestation, which is a plant phytoestrogen. What happened? At puberty, 44% more parenchymal DNA, so more cells in the good milk-synthesizing tissue. So if I can increase estrogens in that prepubertal period, yes, it has positive effects on mammary development at puberty. In gestation, if you look at energy intake, from day 75 up till farrowing, if you compare 10.5 to 5.8 megacal of ME per day, it decreases the amount of parenchyma. 10.5 is quite a bit. So basically, you don't want to overfeed in terms of energy at the end of gestation because it will have a negative impact on mammary development. Back fat thickness. One study was done where they compared 36 and 25 millimeters of back fat at the end of gestation. They had the audacity to call these pigs lean and fat. Well, I've renamed them fat and obese. I mean, I would love to call myself lean, but let's be serious. Same for the gilts. You're fat and you're obese. That's all there is to it. So if you look at an obese animal, 36 millimeters of back fat, it has a negative effect in terms of mammary development. And they've achieved this through difference in energy and protein intake and gestation. Then I've done a project, and I will cover this in detail at the breakout session, where I've looked at feeding and back fat thickness, and I saw that if you decrease back fat thickness below 16 millimeters at the end of gestation, it also has a negative impact on mammary development. So you have to be careful of extremes, very obese, very thin. If you increase protein intake in gestation, is that good? 4, 8, or 16 grams of lysine per day, no effect on mammary development. However, in terms of milk yield, the 16 grams of lysine per day increase the amount of milk yield in the subsequent lactation. So maybe positive effect. Supplementation with flax. Why would anybody bother with flaxseed? Flax contains oils, but it also contains lignans. Lignans have estrogenic properties. Oops, estrogens are important for mammary development. Maybe if I give it to the animal, it will have a beneficial effect. I gave it to gestating animals, lactating animals, had no positive effect on these animals. But the interesting thing, I'll get it eventually, is the impact was on the offspring. If an animal is having 10% flaxseed from the 63 of gestation to the 21 of lactation, the offspring at puberty will have 31% more parenchymal tissue, which is wonderful. All it's telling me is that I can't retire. I must be crazy to think it's wonderful, but I don't know. Maybe my husband is happy about it. Who knows? But basically, now we can work on the in utero effect. So it's a whole new avenue. You can try to stimulate mammary development of the offspring through what you're feeding the sow in gestation, which is really wonderful. Lactation, nothing that's out of the ordinary. If you increase energy intake, if you increase protein intake, you will increase the weight of the mammary tissue, obviously of the nurse glands, increase the number of cells in this mammary tissue, increase mammary proteins. So all it's telling you is continue doing what you're doing, which is trying to feed as much feed to your lactating animals. They need to eat energy and protein to maximize mammary development. Now we're moving to the Teat Use 1 project, which is the one I talked about 5 years ago. I had been asked quite a few times, I have this primiparous animal that's really thin. I want to take away some of the piglets. What's going to happen in the next lactation? If I get rid of some piglets and some teats are not being used, will they produce as much milk? The answer is no. What I've done is I've blocked teats, either the same teats in parity 1 and parity 2, or different teats, so that when the little piglet came to a teat in the second lactation, it was either suckling a teat that had been used before or a teat that had not been used before. And I compared the weight gain of these two types of piglets. 1.12 kilogram difference on day 56. So now I tell producers, I have the answer for you. Yes, there is a difference. On day 56, your piglet will weigh less if he's drinking, or she's drinking, who knows, from a teat that had not been used. Then when I was here 5 years ago, somebody raised their hand. I was all happy and excited about those results and just burst my bubble. No, actually, they gave me an idea for a great project. Then they said, yes, but how long does a teat need to be used for it to have no negative effect on the next lactation? Can I remove the piglet before day 21? Wonderful question. Then I said, ask me back in a couple of years and I'll give you the answer. And here I am. So you can't say that scientists don't hold their promises. I mean, example that we do. So the next project, which was answering the question, what is the minimum time that a teat must be used in first lactation to avoid any negative impact in the second lactation? So what I've done is in the first lactation, I had either 2 days, 7 days, or 21 days of suckling. And then I looked at the lactation performance of these sows in the second lactation. So what did we use? We used Prepubertal sows, obviously, divided them in 3 groups. 2 days, we had 20 sows. 7 days, 20 sows. 21 days, 21 sows. We standardized litters to 12 good piglets. No runts and no very big, of average weight, within 12 hours postpartum. And we taped all the surplus teats, mainly the ones in the back that are more difficult for access by the piglets. So what we had was 12 teats and 12 good piglets. And they suckled for different time periods. Then in the second lactation, I did the same thing. I standardized again the litters to 12. I taped the extra teats. So still I had 1 piglet per teat, 12 piglets per litter. Sampled milk on day 21, and then I weighed the piglets. If we look at the body weights, day 2, you have similar body weights, which is exactly what we wanted. So we start with the same thing. Then you move on and you look at the weights. No difference. Some scientists may tell me, boy, Chantal, your stuff is boring. You get no results. How do you get excited about this? And I say, no. You don't understand lactation biology. This is wonderful. What this is telling me, irrespective of whether the piglets stay 2 days, 7 days, 21 days, it does not further improve growth rate. So it's telling me 2 days is good enough. If you leave a piglet on a teat for 2 days in the first parity, then the mammary gland will be able to synthesize enough milk in the next parity. Milk composition was not altered, and it did give us wonderful results that suckling of a teat for 2 days during the first lactation is sufficient to get proper mammary development in lactation 2. This time it's giving me how much time I have left. Is that what that is, the 23 minutes? Yes? So I can slow down? I can breathe a little. Good. I was running through this. Okay. Now we're moving to the second part. Colostrum. If you take a dictionary and you look at what's colostrum, it's a liquid rich in proteins that's secreted by the mammary gland after parturition. Wonderful, but you need to put more stuff in that definition. There's a lot of other constituents that are important in colostrum. First, until when do we call it colostrum and why? What are the roles of colostrum for the newborn piglets? So let's first look at the composition. We call it colostrum for 24 hours. Then we call it transition milk from 36 to 72 hours. And then, whoops, it's loud all of a sudden. Then we call it milk. Why? Because of the change in composition and mainly in terms of proteins and immunoglobulins. So if you look at proteins, very high, 0, 12, 24 hours, but it's going down. Immunoglobulins are really high again, 0, 12, 24 hours, then going down. Dry matter decreases. Fat, on the other hand, increases. And lactose increases. So basically, you have a very rich liquid in terms of protein and immunoglobulins, but also in other constituents. And this changes over time very rapidly. Other constituents are hormones, growth factors, enzymes, minerals, vitamins, somatic cells, and I'm sure there's more. So all these can be important for the piglet. We call colostrum the life elixir for piglets. If they don't have colostrum, they will die. That's it, that's all. So they need it. Why? The roles for the colostrum, first, when you look at a newborn pig, they're very, very vulnerable. I'm sure you're all aware of this. If you don't put a heat lamp on top of your pig, goodbye, you're finished. They have about 1% body fat. And the temperature in your farrowing room can't be warm enough for them to be warm, so they need an extra source of heat. But the colostrum is very important to provide them an energy source, to help them keep themselves warm. It also provides passive immunity, mainly in terms of immunoglobulin G. So this is transferred from the sow serum to the colostrum, straight to the piglet, and then it will really help in terms of disease resistance. It's also, as I mentioned, a source of growth factors. One example, what we call IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1. It's very important for the development of the gut system, gastrointestinal tract. So this is coming through the colostrum. And there's also a lot of other bioactive components that will affect later development of the reproductive system. And that goes back to what you heard Dr. Flowers mention earlier, which we call the lactocrine hypothesis. There are very important bioactive components in colostrum. One example is the hormone relaxin. And if the little baby pig is not ingesting those components, it will affect its reproductive development, mainly in terms of uterus in that case, at puberty, much later on. So what happens in the early neonatal period is very important. And I was so happy to hear Billy say that it's important when you want to choose your next replacement gilts to look at what happens not only at puberty, but even before. We have to start a new mindset to look at more, potential good producing sows. The piglet has to ingest 250 grams of colostrum if we want it to have a decreased rate of pre-weaning mortality and if we want it to grow. So 250 grams for a piglet of average body weight, which is 1.4 kilogram, will decrease the risk of pre-weaning mortality, provide a source of passive immunity, and allow for body growth. So if you have 13 piglets in a litter, it means you need 3.3 kilograms of colostrum. Hélène Canel in INRA, France, did a study where she used 200 sows, and she looked at the amount of colostrum produced, and she saw that 1/3 of these animals did not have enough colostrum to meet the needs of the piglets. So we need to work at increasing the amount of colostrum. If you look at how much colostrum is produced, it's very variable. So there's estimates going from 1.91 to 5.31 kilogram per 24 hours. However, if you look at a lot of papers, people seem to converge around 3.5 kilo over 24 hours. So that's about the amount of colostrum that's produced. Now, how is it affected? What affects the amount of colostrum and the composition of colostrum? The sow may have effects, and the piglets may also have effects. The amount of colostrum ingested in the first 24 hours postpartum. If the piglet is bottle-fed, so it can drink as much as it wants, it will consume more than 450 grams of colostrum. If the piglet is suckling from the sow, so he's got to go and fight and get there, and he can only drink what the mother is giving him, around 200 to 370 grams per kilo body weight. So the sow is definitely limiting the amount of colostrum that the piglet is ingesting. Interestingly, litter size does not affect colostrum yield. So even if you have a bigger litter, it will not make it that there is more colostrum, so everybody will get a little bit less. If you compare a litter of 9 to 12 piglets, and you look at the growth rate in the first 3 days postpartum, there's no difference. It will come later on, though. There will be a difference later on. Now I'm just talking colostrum. The amount of colostrum ingested per piglet, obviously, if you increase litter size, it will decrease, and that's shown by 22 to 42 grams reduction when you increase one piglet. Colostral fat will change and will increase when you increase litter size. Now, somebody may think if the piglet is more heavy per se at birth, it will increase it will increase colostrum yield. But if you look at the literature, some people say yes and some people say no. However, one thing is very sure. That's the global vitality of the litter that's important. If you have piglets that are more vigorous, it will lead to a shorter birth to suckling interval. So they will take less time to go to the other to get to the colostrum. And this will, in fact, be related with an increased colostrum yield. So you want vigorous piglets that will go to the other as soon as possible and get as much colostrum as possible. Gestation length has an effect. 113 days of gestation, these animals will produce more colostrum compared to 114 or 115 days. If you look at the sow per se, her age, her body weight have no effect on colostrum yield. If you look at the duration of farrowing, no effect again on colostrum yield. However, parity has an effect. Interestingly, it's the opposite than what you see with milk yield. So if you look at colostrum yield, in one study, parity 2s and 3s have more colostrum than parity 1 or older sows. In another study, parity 1, 2, and 3 have more colostrum than older sows. And in another study, parity 1 and 2 have more colostrum than older sows. So what comes around generally is that younger sows produce more colostrum. It's the reverse with milk. Primiparous animals would produce less milk than multiparous animals. So it's strange. It's the opposite for colostrum and for milk. There's also a negative relation with the parity in colostral fat. So if you move on from parity 1 to parity 11, it will decrease the amount of fat in the colostrum. And the other way around, it will have a positive impact on the immunoglobulins in the colostrum. And this is thought to be due to a greater antigenic exposure. So if your sow is older and has seen more antigens in her life, she will pass on more of this passive immunity in terms of immunoglobulins to her piglets. Genotype, the breed of the sow, does it affect colostrum in terms of composition? The answer is yes. I'm not going to go through all these. But basically, if you look at proteins, growth factors, fat, lactose, all these can be affected by the breed of the animal. So yes, selection could be possible to a certain extent to improve the composition of the colostrum. Hormones will undoubtedly affect colostrum yield because the whole process of colostrogenesis is under hormonal control. Before parturition, you have a peak of prolactin. So I did a study where I inhibited that peak, and all the piglets would have died if I had not intervened. Don't worry, I did not let them die, but it would have died because there was no onset of lactation, so no colostrogenesis. So this big peak of prolactin before parturition is essential for the whole process to start. When you have a peak of prolactin, it happens at the same time that you have a decrease in progesterone at the end of gestation. So this combination is crucial. And it was found that the ratio of prolactin to progesterone is important. So if this ratio is greater, more prolactin with less progesterone, 24 hours before parturition, that will be related with an increase in terms of colostrum yield. Farrowing induction. Most people will induce farrowings. So if you use prostaglandins and you induce farrowings on the 111 or 114, it will tend to decrease colostrum yield. If you do this earlier in gestation, if you do this on the 109, then the negative effect is worst. So you do decrease colostrum yield by 32%, increase piglet birth weight by 10%. So basically what I'm telling you, don't induce farrowings too early. If you do it on day 109, you're in trouble. You shouldn't do that. So 111, but I wouldn't go much sooner. How about nutrition? Does it affect the amount or the composition of colostrum? Well, what we know is basically it's more the composition that's affected. So if you look at energy intake in gestation, if you increase the amount of dietary fat at the end of gestation, this was done with either 8% animal fat, 10% corn oil, 12% corn oil, and those are just examples. And generally, yes, you do see an increase in the total fat in colostrum if you give more fat to your sow in late gestation. If you change the source of the fat, does it affect composition. Changing the source of fat will not affect the amount of fat in the colostrum, but it will affect the type of fat in colostrum. So when you look at what we call the fatty acid profile, they compare long to short chain fatty acids, polyunsaturated to saturated, you see a difference. And most importantly, a lot of studies have been done with fish oils. So salmon, tuna, cod, Manhattan, shark oils. And these were shown to increase long chain, the polyunsaturated fatty acids and 3 fatty acids. But most importantly, in some cases, such as with shark oil, it also increased immunoglobulin G in colostrum, which is very important. So the use of fish oils might be interesting for colostrum composition. In gestation, moving away from energy and going to proteins, if you increase protein, if you increase lysine, no effect on colostrum composition. On the other hand, if you decrease protein, again, no effect on colostrum composition. So proteins per se does not alter the composition of colostrum, whether you increase it or decrease it at the end of gestation. Environment, interesting. We know that for the first 12 hours after the piglets are born, colostrum is available all the time. Then you start to get a cyclical pattern, whereby colostrum is only available at certain periods of time. And the availability is then dependent on the nursing behavior of the pig. If you have a fan that's making a lot of noise, and the piglets cannot hear the other piglets squealing, or the mother grunting to say, come on guys, it's time to eat, then it may disturb the nursing behavior and they may consume less colostrum. So environment is important. Ambient temperature, if you have a tropical climate, it will decrease the amount of energy in the colostrum. If you have a heat stress, again, 32 degrees Celsius in another study was found to decrease both protein and IgG. And the snare, the stress in itself of restraining a sow with a snare, that was done 5 minutes per day for the last 5 weeks of gestation. And this did not affect IgGs in colostrum, but it decreased the IgG in the piglet blood and increased the percent of sick piglets. So this is one stress that may have an effect. We don't know about other stress, but in my book, it's never a good idea to stress your animals right before parturition. Now we're moving to the last thing, which is the project I've just done recently, trying to prolong the colostral phase. Now you know why I want to do this. Colostrum is so important for the piglets. They cannot get enough. What can I do to make them have more colostrum? Colostrum composition is affected by the status of tight junctions between mammary epithelial cells. Let me rephrase this. You have the epithelial cells that synthesize the milk, but between those cells, you have a gap. So what is in the sow blood can go into the lumen or nice alveolar cells that I showed you at the beginning. So what's in the blood from the sow can go to the colostrum easily during this colostral period. So that means big molecules, proteins, immunoglobulins, they can go right through. Growth factors, anything that's big can go through it. And what happens after parturition, these tight junctions that we call, the junctions between the cells, start to get tighter, and then the big molecules can go through, and then you have no more colostrum, you move on to transition milk and milk. So during that time, as I showed before, decrease protein, decrease immunoglobulins, increase fat, increase lactose. Okay, but these tight junctions, we can do something about them. It was shown that if you give a very high amount of oxytocin, which most of you use when your animals are farrowing, if you give a high amount of oxytocin, it will alter the space of these tight junctions between the mammary cells. That was shown in goats, in rodents, in cows, but not in pigs. So I said, why wouldn't pigs act the same way as these other animals? So I've done a study. And in swine, this is most important, because if you can increase by 15 ml the amount of milk that's consumed by a piglet in the first 4 hours after its birth, it's going to increase its immunoglobulin levels and decrease its mortality. So it's very crucial for pigs. So the question was, can injections of a high dose of oxytocin in early lactation prolong this colostral phase? We used second parity animals. We induced farrowing on the 114. And we only took animals that farrowed between noon and 8 o'clock at night. And that was what I call the day 1 of lactation. Then I divided them in 2 groups. Oxytocin, that received IM injections of 75 international units. If you give it during farrowing, anyway, sorry. Sorry to you guys, your ears. Making sure you're awake. Bang, bang, bang. Anyway. If you give oxytocin at farrowing, you should give about 10 international units. And if I want to get milk from a sow, I will use 20 international units. But now we're talking 75. That's a lot. That's what we call a supraphysiological dose. So I had these treated animals that were receiving 4 injections, 2 per day, on day 2 and on the, starting 16 hours approximately after the birth of the last piglet. And then what happened? We standardized the litters, obviously, to have the same number of piglets. And then we weighed the piglets every week. On day 2, we weighed them at exactly 8-hour difference to see if they were consuming more. And obviously, we did not give any creed feed to the piglets so that their growth rate would reflect the amount of colostrum or milk coming from the mom. Then we took milk samples and measured its composition, both early and a little bit later on days 2, 4, and 5 of lactation. Results. Number of live-born piglets, 16.4, 15.9. Same thing. So we had the same litter size in treated and controls, which is good. That's what we wanted. And then we standardized them. We had a tendency for more pre-weaning mortality in the control compared to the oxytocin animals. Please be careful. 10 animals in my book. It's 20 actually, but still, it's not enough. So gives us an idea that yes, maybe it would be important in terms of survival. We need to do more projects with a larger number of sows, but it may prove to be beneficial in terms of mortality. If you look at weight gain, no difference. But then again, 10, 20 was the other study. But then again, you had only 10 sows per treatment. So I'm showing it because people will ask me, what happened with gain? No difference in gain, but the major point would be more in terms of survival of piglets. That's where this colostrum might come to be most important. If you look in composition, in terms of composition of the milk or colostrum, if you look at what's circled, that's what's important. Okay, day of lactation of the horizontal axis, so 2 a.m., 2 p.m., 4 p.m., 5 p.m., energy. 2 p.m. These animals have had 1 injection of prolactin. Oxytocin. Oof, too many hormones. And not even any wine at lunch. Can you believe what it would be like? Anyway, they had 1 injection of oxytocin, and right here, more energy in their colostrum. Right here, more protein in their colostrum. No change in fat, no change in lactose, which we would not expect anyway. Dry matter, no change either. Look at this. Sodium to potassium ratio. Why? Why would I even care about that? That is the typical marker for the distance between those mammary cells. If that ratio is greater, I have more space between the cells. So the mammary tight junctions are more open. So what have I done? I've given only one injection of oxytocin, 16 hours after the sow finished to farrow. Wah! Don't go that direction. There we go. And in the afternoon, after I've given that 1 injection, I've really made these junctions more open. Look at this, IGF-1, much greater in those secretions, so it's continuing to pass through because of that oxytocin injection. IgG, immunoglobulin G, crucial for the baby pig. It's increased. IgA, significant, but a little increase. So what I'm telling you is it worked. It worked. If I gave 1 injection of oxytocin in early lactation, I did manage to prolong the colostral phase, shown by this increase in sodium potassium. And this is what's happening within 8 hours, but not any longer. So it's crucial. You don't want to give that injection too late because it's going to be too late to have any beneficial effects. So you want to do it quite early on. And in terms of the quality of the milk, it increases the amount of protein, immunoglobulin G, IgA, and also the growth factor, IGF-1, so any other growth factors. So it is indicating a passive transfer to the piglets. I'm concluding in 2 minutes and 3 seconds, so I'm fine. This is really bothersome. Mammary development is important, and yes, it can be altered by hormones. I've mentioned prolactin, estrogens, by nutrition, and by management of the animals, whether the teats are used in first parity or not, and for how long. You don't want to restrict feed intake of your growing gilts from 90 days of age to puberty. Body condition at the end of gestation is important, and you want to maximize feed intake of your animals in lactation. As I mentioned, teat use in first lactation is important for the performance of that teat in the second lactation. In terms of colostrum, the sow does limit the amount of colostrum that's ingested by the piglets, and a lot of factors can come into play: genetic, nutrition in late gestation, farrowing induction with prostaglandins, and recent results have shown that a high dose of oxytocin that's given 16 hours after the birth of the last piglet will prolong the colostral phase and improve quality of early milk, hence having a positive effect on immunity and survival of piglets. Now, let me put a damper on this. As a good scientist, I've given that talk in Quebec with a bunch of vets in the room, and a lot of producers came to me and said, oh, I want to try. And then I sent 2 back home, have big barns, with a vet, because obviously you want to make sure that there is no negative side effects. I haven't seen any with 10 animals treated and 10 controls, so only 10 animals. I saw no bad side effects. But it's good to have a vet that kind of follows things around to make sure that there is no side effects. So it's being tried now by producers in a larger scale, because I can't do this at Lennoxville. So I don't know when, but sometime we may be able to have some results, and maybe somebody in Ontario will try it. Who knows? So the study of colostrogenesis in sows is particularly difficult. Trying to measure the amount of colostrum produced is so hard. You have to be awake at night to be there when the little piglet is born, to weigh it, and to weigh it 24 hours later. I'm too old for this stuff. So I work with younger people who want to do it, and there's not too many nowadays, so there's not much work done on it. However, it's sad because it's very essential to continue research in that field, because we need to assist the needs of the producer, and colostrum yield, in my opinion, is a major research area that should be worked on. Thank you. 0. Oh, I'm proud of myself.
And I do have a question for you. You say weaning pigs at 2 days does not cause negative effects on mammary development in subsequent lactations, but could it cause downstream issues with reproductive performance?
Reproductive performance of that sow, I presume? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I take.
I doubt it, but Billy can tell if he thinks otherwise. But I guess it depends how many piglets you remove, though. If you start with 14 and then you move to... But even then, Billy did it and he saw no negative effects. So in my mind, I don't think it would have a negative effect in terms of reproduction of that sow. What do you think, Billy? You hate me now, don't you? But decreasing litter size in that first parity, I don't think would have a negative impact in terms of reproduction. I said truly the other way around. If she's too lean and you don't remove piglets and she gets even leaner, that will decrease longevity and have problems in terms of reproduction.
Okay. I don't have any other questions. I think we'll thank Dr. Farmer and